He's the Eternal who's not really thrilled about any of this. We're talking about Phastos. Hi, I'm Nando, and in this series I take a character from Marvel Comics. I talk about their backstory, their power set, their personality, and I give you some reading recommendations. And that is all because this week this character is being introduced into the collectible card game Marvel Snap. So if you always want to learn about the character, that's the first 80% of the video, Snap Stuff's the last 20. So Phastos, he is another one of the Eternals. This is like the fourth Eternal we've done so far. The backstory for them is the same for everybody. They were created by the race of god alien super beings known as the Celestials. A million years ago, the Celestials basically just took 100 humans and gave them all the superpowers and let them go. And they're like, you're the Eternals. They also made a bunch of people called the Deviants, and those were like little monster guys, and there were way more of them. They didn't have as many superpowers. It was the Eternals' job to make sure the Deviants didn't kill everybody. Or at least that's what they were told. As I've said in all these other videos, each Eternal usually has some sort of analog to a god or mythological figure or ancient legendary guy or something like that. Makkari is Mercury. Circe is Circe, the witch. Now I said she was a witch in the other video. She is technically like, she does witching magic and stuff like that. She is technically apparently a demigod. This was a misconception on my part. But like if you're able to guess, Phastos is going to be the analog of Phastos, the Greek god of the forge. One of, in my opinion, as one of the kids who grew up around the time of the Hercules movie and loved Greek mythology and stuff, one of the more underrated gods, doesn't get involved in everything, like isn't even in Hades 1, shows up in Hades 2, but like a cool god. Basically, he's the engineer god, he builds everything for everybody. Phastos fills a similar role for the Eternals. While all of the Eternals have all of the superpowers when they start out, they can all fly, shoot laser beams, transmute matter, they have super strength, they're more or less invulnerable, they can die, but then they can be brought back to life through a bunch of processes. They have telepathy, like they have all the superpowers. Over the course of their very long lives, they will pick a specialty and then max out their stats so that they are the most that. So for instance, Makkari, the fastest Eternal. And when they do that, yes, they can still do some of those other things, but like not nearly as well. So Makkari is still kind of strong, but not compared to the other Eternals who maxed out strength like Gilgamesh. Phastos maxed out two things. First, he maxed out like genius and invention. He's able to invent anything. Very similar to the X-Men Forge, if you're familiar with Forge, or Iron Man, I guess, especially in more recent interpretations like the Superior Iron Man, where he just like can think of something and create it. Because of that, and because of his connection to Hephaestus, and because Hephaestus is usually pictured as like a blacksmith, or at least is pictured like a blacksmith sometimes, Phastos also has a big hammer. And I guess we're supposed to think like, if you're going to use the big hammer, you got to be pretty strong. Phastos is also one of the stronger Eternals. He's not the strongest Eternal, but he's stronger than your average Eternal. Personality-wise, Phastos doesn't like any of this stuff. He is so not into whatever the Eternals are doing. Like, he'll play around and he'll help people. He's one of the good Eternals, like the hero Eternals, as opposed to the villains like Druig and stuff. But as far as his outlook, it's incredibly bleak. He's very nihilistic, and I understand that. You're an eternal super being who has lived for millions of years. You seem to have a purpose, but it always turns out to be a lie. So yeah, after a couple of cycles of that, I could see getting pretty upset with everything. And because Phastos has existed throughout history, he has also been responsible for a lot of inventions and technologies becoming mainstream. In the movie, one of the things that Phastos either created or just facilitated by advancing technology was the atom bomb. He's very upset about that. But Phastos like likes to mess around, right? Like we learn in X-Men Volume 3, Issue 13 from 2011, Phastos back way in prehistory found a bunch of little like monkey guys that were being attacked by other creatures. He brought them back to his laboratory and experimented on them, turned them into this race of like super evolutionary beings who he then charged with protecting Homo sapiens, making sure they were able to evolve. So like Phastos does stuff like that. One of the other things Phastos did that was pretty cool, he invented the chains that the Eternals used to hold back Uranos, who is their basically Thanos. I know what you're thinking, wait, Thanos is an Eternal. Yes, this is Thanos' grandfather, and he is a problem. We'll get to him in the next video because I think he's very interesting. But like when a Thanos shows up, Phastos is the character who has to figure out how you're going to contain that character. But apart from that, Phastos has not been the most influential of the Eternals, mostly because he just doesn't like getting involved in these conflicts. He wasn't even introduced until the second volume of the Eternals in the 80s. He was not one of the original Eternals created by Jack Kirby. And his whole deal is just like, yeah, he's around, he's seeing all this war, he's not thrilled by it, He's seeing all the, especially Eternal v Eternal fighting. He doesn't like that either. So he wants to stay as far out of all that as possible. When Sprite erased the memories of all the Eternals, Phastos became Phastos. This is one of the names that I did find a little bit more preposterous, not because it's like a crazy name, just because like when characters go to him and they're like, "You're Phastos," and he's like, "No, I'm not, I'm Philip Stoss." Like, that's not, I don't know, maybe in Germany because he is a German engineer in that book, but that always read to me as a name where it's like, come on, dude, you're Phastos if you have a name like that. With Mark Curry, I think there's some deniability. It's like, yeah, no, there's people, but like Phastos, Philip Stoss, thank you, Mortimer, for knocking over Magneto. He needed to be taught a lesson, apparently. When all these Eternals get to live what is kind of their best life, Phastos becomes Philip Stoss. He is a German engineer, worked for an automotive company, and he develops a driverless car. Ooh, wouldn't that be fun? This was back in 2008, and I mean, it's still pretty much a fantasy the way that he's using it, but that's what he spends his time doing, making all these cool inventions. When Thena and Icarus show up and they're like, "Hey, you're an Eternal, come do Eternal stuff with us," Phastos is very hesitant to join up. Like, he doesn't believe them. He's clearly going through a bunch of stuff. Like, he's having nightmares about Eternal stuff, and his memories are very fuzzy, and he has a wife. Like, he has created a life outside of Eternal stuff, like all of the Eternals have when they forget that they were Eternals. But Phastos seems like maybe the one more than any of the rest of them who just does not want to go do Eternal stuff anymore, doesn't want to give up this normal life he has. And I think it's funny because when he actually has to decide, like, God, you're right, you guys, I've been telling you two that I am not Phastos this whole time, but now I remember it, and you did the magic touch to me, and now I have the power. The panel that reveals that is him basically saying, like, I am Phastos. But because of his face and kind of his demeanor in it, you really read it as like, I'm Phastos, you know, and like, that's pretty funny, I think. And just interesting. It's a dynamic that I think works really well here. I think the demeanor of Phastos somewhat gets brought over to the Eternals movie, although I do think a little bit of it is lost because his character can't be as unlikable as he kind of is in the books, which is quite unlikable. The most significant thing Phastos did, and I'm going to try not to spoil it because I keep recommending this is going to be his recommendation too, that most recent Kieran Gillen run on the Eternals is, I would say, the best Phastos-centric story. It's a murder mystery. Someone murdered Zuras and sabotaged the machine that brings the Eternals back to life. Phastos is brought in to fix the machine, although he cannot. And as we go on, Phastos has a dialogue with the machine, and we learn more about what Phastos has been up to, what Phastos learns about the machine, and it gives him way more of a story, way more agency than I think we're used to for this character, puts him closer to the center of the story than he usually is. And I think that really helps to define his character a little bit more. And you come out of the story thinking like, man, he doesn't feel like a cool hang, but you know, I respect him now. I think I understand Phastos more after that. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phastos was one of the Eternals that showed up in the Eternals movie from 2021. He's played by Brian Tyree Henry, who most people probably know as Paperboy from Atlanta. Although, I don't know, those Godzilla movies he's in are pretty popular, so maybe people know him from that. In fact, he's one of those actors that keeps popping up, you know. Let's see, what's Brian Tyree Henry's? What are his biggest credits? Oh, you know what he's big in? You know what he's good in, Brian Tyree Henry? He's very good in that movie Bullet Train. He has a lot to do in Bullet Train. I think he's pretty fun. He's also going to be in the new Transformers movie. And look at that, he was in the original cast of Book of Mormon with Josh Gad and Andrew Rannells, which I saw. So I've seen him on Broadway, and at least I thought he was pretty good. I don't remember him super well, but I bet he was good. But yeah, I would say his role in Bullet Train, his upcoming role as Megatron in the new Transformers movie, and his role as Paperboy in Atlanta, probably what most people know Brian Tyree Henry for, although this was a very high profile role for him. Two things that I think they nailed in terms of comic representation. This version of Phastos is not happy with the mark he has left on mankind, not even just saying that like he isn't necessarily a nihilist, but he's just like looking at what the Eternals have done. Have they actually made human civilization better? Have they made things worse? Did their existence lead mankind to closer to war, closer to destruction? I think that's interesting. That's definitely something the Phastos from the comics would do. And then the other thing that I like about Phastos, he is the Eternal out of all of the other Eternals, really, that seems to have created a family outside of Eternalsdom, right? Like all the rest of the Eternals are either single or dating or something like that, but they're kind of doing their own thing. Like Druig's using his superpowers to protect the people in that village, or Makari's using her superpowers to run around and collect things. Phastos, I'm assuming, has a job that he uses his engineering powers for, but he seems to have settled into his life as just a dad. living with his husband. And in the comics, Phastos was always, I want to say kind of black, but in the beginning when Phastos was created, he was very clearly black. As time marched on, he became less and less so, to the point where he was kind of thought of to be like racially ambiguous. I would say in the comics recently, they have kind of decided that is how he looks. He is a black man. But that was not always something that was consistent throughout the comics with Phastos, in a way that's like, it's not that surprising because there aren't a lot of Humongous Eternals fans. So this isn't like if you tried to do that with a character people really cared about. And especially if you are a Humongous Eternals fan, it's like, all right, well, are you a Humongous Phastos fan? Probably not. But I would say, and where was I going with this? Oh, so Phastos in the comic has a wife. Phastos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a husband. He is one of the first gay superheroes in a movie. I believe the first one in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that is like a superhero as part of the superhero team. So that's cool. And he has 2 kids, which, you know what, we didn't really get into this in this video. We talked about it a little bit with Thena. When Eternals have kids, they turn out strange. Like, they have superpowers sometimes, and that is sometimes a problem. It's not usually a big problem because very few of them do it. I don't think we're going to get another Eternals movie, and if we do, I don't think it's going to focus on the children of Phastos and I believe Ben. But if they did, that would be kind of interesting. Like, if they just showed up as like a big monster with like 4 arms, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's the Eternals kids. Right, that's what happens when you have Eternal kids with people who, don't even get me started on with, you know, other Eternals or Deviants or other aliens or anything like that. In the movie, he doesn't have a hammer. His powers are visualized with little golden discs that he can make. He also invents the Unimind, which is cool. He's also seen, I like this scene where he's like, hey, I made this cool thing for humanity. They're going to love it. It's going to help them plant really well. And Ajax basically like, well, you can't give them that. Yeah, that's cheating. We gotta let them figure it out on their own. And he's like, okay. So I do like that, especially early in his career, he has more ambition, and he doesn't feel like that's being really utilized by the other Eternals, which makes sense why, like, when we see him, he's like, I don't care about any of this stuff anymore. I'm done. You guys knocked it out of me. I don't want to do it anymore. As far as reading recommendations, again, I mean, it's the Kieran Gillen run. He's so simple because, like, Phastos has been in a fair amount of Eternals comics, but I don't think he has had as much to do with some of these other guys. So I would say the Eternals run that starts in 2021, written by Kieran Gillen with art by Esad Ribic, Matthew Wilson, and Clayton Cowles. That is a good Phastos story. I would say stick with it, because even if he's not at the center of the story, eventually it'll come back to him because they keep needing to check back in on Phastos. Besides that, you could read that X-Men story I referenced, which is X-Men Volume 3, Issue 13, I think, but he's only in it for like 2 pages. In Marvel Snap, Phastos is currently a 3-cost, 3-power card that has the on-reveal ability, give each card in your deck -1 cost or +2 power. At first glance, you know, it doesn't feel like it's got too much to do with his lore. I guess he's building things potentially for the Eternals and for your teammates. When you really look at it, what he is kind of a less focused Forge. He's a Forge more focused on like the universe and building up humanity and everybody in the deck, as opposed to Forge, who works with individual X-Men and gives them weapons and things that help enhance their superpowers. Phastos is kind of that, but a more scattershot approach. So, you know, it's not my favorite one of these, but it makes sense. As for where he stands in the meta, I feel like a lot of people have been overvaluing Phastos. Like, I think he will be a card that people can use, but I don't think he's going to make as big of a difference as Athena did, or as Cersei did, really. I think Cersei became a very fun card to play, having played her a lot this week. Like, I think there's a lot there, and I like that. I think Phastos will become maybe a helpful card in, obviously, like the Surfer 3 deck that everyone loves to play with Sebastian Shaw and cards like that. But do I think it will be a card that like completely changes the game? I'm doubtful. Just because it doesn't seem like what's happening with that power is all that dramatic. And also, it's another one of those cards that can be completely negated by Mobius. And there's like a couple cards where it's just like Mobius takes care of that, Mobius takes care of that, Mobius takes care of that. So I'm not super worried about cards like that having a huge impact on the meta, because Mobius is a good counterbalance on them. I do think he synergizes pretty well with Arishem, which I guess kind of makes sense because he's an Eternal. And you know, there's not too many cards he doesn't synergize well with besides Mobius. Mobius is his arch enemy, and that is true of a lot of Mobius cards. As far as variants, I have to say this every week, he needs more variants. They all need more variants. I think his Spotlight variant is cool, and I honestly don't hate the base art for this card as much as I do some of the other cards this season, but I just think I would like to see more variants. He's got some cool looks. He's got a lot of very different looks. There was a time when he had a completely different outfit that was weird. The Eternals kind of all pretended to be superheroes for a while, and he is Ceasefire. Also, he's sometimes coated with purple as his like signature color, although that's not incredibly consistent. Sometimes Cersei's the purple one, so that isn't as consistent as like Makari with red. So thank you to everybody who's watching this. I hope you guys are enjoying these. We got Arishem next week. Arisham's gonna be a little different. It'll be a little fun, and then after that, we're going into the Deadpool season, Gwenpool, all those guys. A lot of characters that people probably had some questions about if they've seen the movies or if they've just heard the name Gwenpool and were like, oh, I think I get that. You don't. It's much more complicated than that, but it's kind of fun. There's some good Gwenpool comics out there. I like this video, share it on social media, Reddit, Discord, forums, all that stuff for people to play Marvel Snap. And if you're someone who has access to the Snap, content creator program, then I don't know, recommend me or something, or read my email, because it'd be cool if I was in that. Besides that, thank you all for watching this. That's all I got. Stay safe. I'll see you next time. We're talking about Arishem.